Motivation is what gets you there in the first part, the passion. What keeps you going is discipline. Is the motivation sufficient to get to a point where you have enough discipline? Is a question you should ask yourself. Beyond that, do you think it's sufficient for you to then grind it out when the rubber really hits the road? And that's important to consider. Because I always think like, I'm very passionate about this, but that's not what keeps me going.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the What It Takes podcast. I'm joined today by Akhil. Brother, how are you, man?
Doing well, Darren. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, it's a real pleasure. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of an introduction in terms of what is it that you do today? Because I found it quite fascinating, but I want you to say it in your own words.
Thank you. So hi everyone, my name's Akhil Shivanandan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Green Story. We're a global platform that helps textiles and apparel companies to help them understand the footprint of their products. So the t-shirts, the pair of trousers you're wearing right now, what's the embedded carbon in that, how much water went into making it, how much energy went into making it. You can all see that at your fingertips for the companies that work with us, thanks to the data that we have. So we understand the supply chain, we get real verified data and help companies present this information in a transparent, clear manner to you via digital product passports and systems that we have. And the idea is to promote transparency, accountability in the supply chain and help companies reduce the impact, which speaks to our wider goal as a company to help 1 billion consumers make greener choices, consumers like you and me.
That's incredible, man. So essentially, what your business does, just to like break it down into the dumbest of dumbest, there is you could tell me how much went into the clothes that I'm wearing right now in terms of output in CO2 and all of that.
That's exactly it. And a lot of companies do that. What we're making sure that we do, how we do this is with real data, because a lot of companies do estimations with broad data, or there's something called spend-based accounting for carbon, which is if you're in an industry, there is a carbon value assigned for each dollar you spend in your supply chain. And that's just how it's put, and that's widely inaccurate. So we're just trying to combat all of that. Make sure you really know what you're getting into when you buy an item.
And so, Akhil, talk to me a little bit about how, what is your background? How did you end up with this business? So like, let's go back to a couple of years prior to this. What did you do? What was your early life like? What is your story?
Yeah, I think the genesis of this business is not a professional one. It's a very personal one.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been very, very interested in the field of sustainability ever since I was young. I was very fortunate when I was young to be able to travel to rural areas of forests and all these places with my dad when I was young. And this gave me an appreciation for nature as it is, on the state of the world, and a wider perspective on how things are. And I really got into environmentalism and understanding that even in my school years.
Yes.
And one of the dreams that I had was to somehow get involved in the environment. I didn't even know the word sustainability at that time. It was just like eco-conscious or whatever it is.
You felt this passion though.
I did. I felt like maybe it's part of my nature. I felt I needed to protect and preserve what I wanted to do.
Yes.
And if you think about it, it's kind of about preserving our lifestyle as it is right now. If you're somebody who likes to eat fish, maybe you'd want to eat fish 50 years from now when you retire. And that's not going to be very viable as things are now. So it's just about, we're pretty lucky to live in mostly peaceful times despite everything. And it's a rare period in history. And so to preserve that, we need to preserve the earth and the environment. So that's part of where I see my vision and mission in life, is to see what I can do to support that. And so I always had that kind of mindset. How do I contribute? And my education was very traditional, in the sense I went to school, did my engineering and computer science. And that's kind of towards the end of that education during my bachelor's is when I started really thinking about what my career could be and what could happen. So I started looking into opportunities with non-engineering firms, I guess, to get into sustainability. And that's how my first career started in sustainability. I was very fortunate to get into a consulting and market research firm and started working on sustainability-oriented projects, renewable energy, eco-labeling, all that stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And this was in India, but also the projects were all over the world. And before we, Charity talked about the opportunity to travel around the world. So I had that from a very young age, and it broadened my horizons, but also gave me a lot of exposure on the various aspects of sustainability. And in 2011, I moved to Canada and continued my journey there. And that's where Green Story kind of started sprouting my brain. I met my co-founder during my MBA in Canada, and we used to just kick around ideas.
So you moved to Canada to start an MBA?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually moved to Canada more to explore a career in the renewable energy industry. And it was
interesting. So you moved there to pursue a career, and then how did you then end up doing the MBA?
Well, to get to that career, I needed to do an MBA because I wanted to get into renewable energy, like trading as well as in the finance roles, to kind of see how all of these different aspects of the industry fit together. So I got in, very fortunate to end up with a utilities company where I did mergers and acquisitions for a couple of years. Did about $500 million worth of deals before.
Incredible.
Then I really wanted to move on and get more hands-on in the space. Started working with the government of Ontario on carbon offsetting and cap and trade. And during all this time, I was talking with Nav, my co-founder, on how do we make a real impact, because this stuff was great, but I felt it was too slow, and I didn't think it was really moving the needle. So I was thinking, how do we make a difference now? And Green Story as an idea sprung from that. How do we get people to make better choices? And we had this idea of having maximum impact. How do we do that if everybody had to make a better choice? And this 1 billion number that we came up with came out of that research. It wasn't actually random. We actually did research and figured out who are the people that make a difference in supply chains. And we figured out it's all of us here. It's the super consumers of the world. And we're about 1 billion people in number. Must be more now. This was like a 10-year-old research.
Yeah.
But these billion people, if we start choosing more vegan options, if we start choosing more organic, the market reacts to that. Yes. Sometimes quite aggressively. That's why we have such a proliferation of vegan options now, because a lot of people have chosen to be vegan. So we wanted to repeat that at scale across the world with Green Story. And the idea of showing data in a way that people make better choices kind of came from that.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we essentially, the consumer, are the ones that can dictate whether companies and the rest of the supply chain are more eco-friendly. Is what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
And so moving ahead with Green Story, because when you founded this business, right? I mean, it was quite interesting because you've got this opportunity to, present it, give a little bit more background in terms of how Green Story then actually became a business.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we initially started off as just like blogs and Facebook pages and ideas around that. And we started testing it out in different aspects. 2015 is when we officially started pushing this. But it was basically consulting with Excel files and working through this. So we had this idea and a vision. We really weren't super clear on how we were going to make that happen. What followed then was 2 years of experimentation and research before we figured out this is exactly what we want to do. And we launched V1 of the product, I would say, in 2018, where there's basically a Shopify plugin, more or less, which companies could present, and we would do the data manually on the back end. So you could show if you bought an organic shirt, how much water you would save, how much energy you'd save, how much emissions you'd save, for example. And we were doing this for many different industries, but as we started to grow and slowly take off, we onboarded, I think, about 30 customers in the first 6 months. We realized the pull was coming from the fashion sector, that there was a huge demand and consumer consciousness shifting around this. So we started to get that more and more in place and focus on the fashion space and getting the data in. And one of the big things we realized, there's a big lack of data in this space. People are making wild assumptions when they're modeling it. There are companies who claim to be accurate in how they measured it, but one of the things that I've seen happening is they didn't have data on a particular material, let's say viscose, and they replaced that material for their modeling purposes with cotton. The difference that you have in impact is 90%.
Yeah.
Wild. And that's how they're doing this. So we started building data. Like, let's make it more accurate.
But well, hold on. So these companies are essentially saying that they're more eco-friendly than they are.
A lot of times, yes, they are. And a lot of the times they're weirdly enough saying they're less eco-friendly than they are just because of the assumptions that they've made.
They don't have the data.
Yeah. They don't have the data. It's not. I don't think. What I realized is going in as like almost an activist mindset. I thought they were being fraudulent a lot of the time, and I realized that a lot of companies just don't have this tool set to do this or the training. You have teams which are like the sustainability teams of billion-dollar companies, and there's 3 of them, and they have to coordinate this. It's a near impossible task. They're being set up to fail. So we just started making sure we have good data when we work with this. It's a longer process, but it's paid off now. So how the system has changed over the years is we've slowly been automating bits and bits and bits now to a point now where if you want within the system, when you initially put in basic information on your supply chain, you can get an answer in 5 minutes. Which would have been just crazy for me to think. When we started off, it used to take 6 months to get one output.
How do you get access to the information? How do you know exactly the output, the carbon footprint that it leaves in all aspects of the supply chain?
So the way this kind of information is gathered is basically large-scale surveys, right? So if somebody is saying, hey, organic cotton is better, how that's been done is someone has gone out into the field and over a period of 2-3 years has measured the carbon output of like a set of organic cotton farms versus conventional cotton farms, and then kind of made these big data sets happen. In a very simplistic way, that's how it happens. And so on and on for each and every process in the supply chain. So, for spinning, for fabric weaving, all of these things, they look at each of these steps and say, okay, this is how much it's happened. We do a little bit of that, but we also work directly with the factories and have put in the kind of groundwork of going and visiting places by ourselves and checking and testing the data and then using that data to supplement what's already been a global effort by a lot of companies to get a lot of this data together. We make sure that the data is even more accurate, so you don't have to make wild assumptions. You can actually put real data in.
And because you measure the whole supply chain, right?
Yes.
And break down the supply chain for me real quick. So I mean, obviously you have the production, but you have transportation, you have production, manufacturing, harvesting, transportation, manufacturing. Like how does this supply chain look like from actual raw material to end consumer?
Right. So you must have heard of the term cradle to grave, right?
Cradle
to grave.
I've heard of the term, yes.
Yeah. So that's basically a supply chain as it's defined, right?
I see.
Cradle is like, all the raw materials, everything beginning from it. It can be recycled stuff. It can be crops that are grown from the ground, minerals that are extracted from the earth, the oil that's taken in from the oil fields. That is like the initial raw material extraction that's done, no matter what. And then there is a processing that happens. In the case of polyester, for example, the oil is processed into polyester. In the case of cotton, the crop is harvested and ginned into fibers. The second step takes place where you have a usable raw material. The processing is done. And then from that, in the case of fashion or apparel or textiles, you start creating fibers from it. Not fibers, sorry, yarn from it, right? Like we're making it into threads. So that's a secondary process that happens. And then you have all this treatment that happens at the same time. including sizing, dyeing, all these processes that happen, then knitting it or weaving it into fabric. Then you have additional treatment of that for binding the colors, all of those kinds of things. Then finally, you kind of have the cut and sew process. And in between all of that, there's all the traveling and distribution, all of that, which happens. Sometimes it passes a dyeing. If it goes to a dyeing facility, it might go somewhere in another country altogether, get dyed there, and come back. The weirdest thing I've seen is with wool that's harvested in Australia, going across the world to America to get processed and coming back to Australia and then going out again. Wow. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens in the fashion supply chain. And part of it is like cost efficiencies, but part of it is just historically, this is how some supply chains are built. So we kind of look at all of that and we understand where are the issues as well, right? So once we do the model, what you can see is where the biggest hotspots are.
Yeah.
Is it transportation? Is it dyeing? Is it the growing up the crop? That allows companies to pull certain levers to make that reduction in their supply chain to say, okay, let's swap out factories X for factory Y and see what the impact looks like.
Yeah. I mean, the way you're explaining it, right? Like they send it to America, wool, and then back to Australia, and then, back and forth. Is it hard or is it challenging to produce, to have it all in one country or in the same area? Is that like a huge challenge for businesses or the people that do the manufacturing and dyeing and essentially, that are part of that same supply chain?
This is a business or an industry where margins really matter. So a lot of manufacturing goes to the places which are not that expensive. That's why this manufacturing now shifting from China to Vietnam with the tariffs, for example, but it was something that is already happening because Vietnam is cheaper than China. As China's got more advanced and more expensive. There's a lot of manufacturing that happens in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and all these places. The main reason is, of course, there's competency there historically as well, but there's cost, right? Like manufacturing in the US is so much more expensive for many reasons.
Yes.
And fashion supply chains are global. The biggest reason why is material availability is not concentrated in one place. If you want to grow cotton in Canada, good luck with that. If you want to leather in some parts of the world, like good luck with that, right? So it's really about like for specific materials, you have to go to specific regions. So supply chains have historically been set up there.
I understand, yeah. And what is the consequence then of keeping it the way it is as opposed to doing something about it? I mean, if you did not exist and us as the consumers, we weren't conscious about this, what would the consequence be of leaving things the way they are?
So I'm just talking about fashion right now, right, which is itself quite big, but it accounts for anywhere between 8 to 10% of global supply chain emissions, right? That's pretty big. If you think about if all of us choose to have a lower impact and chose to buy more secondhand and buy more organic, and let's say there's a 33% reduction that happens in just, how we wear and use things of that 1 billion people, the total reduction in global carbon footprint would be 1%, which is significant, right? Like we would be, that's kind of like taking Argentina off the map. So it's a massive impact that can be had if you make the change. So basically, if you keep things as they are right now, and we kind of are shifting more and more to faster fashion, speed of light fashion with Temu and Shein and all this stuff, then what will result is basically all the worst case scenarios on climate change that everybody here kind of knows about, right? So there has to be a shift in consumption patterns along with supply chain shifts. The one big thing that I see is impact up the supply chain is one thing, but our studies have shown that a big part of the impact is also usage. A lot of people don't tend to use clothes fully through their life cycle, right? So research that we did with ThreadUp and a few other companies shows that if something can be worn, say, 200 times, people on average would wear it maybe 40 times. So it's about a fifth of where it should be. And that's like then you're producing 5 times more than you need because people are just using and throwing. items.
Mm.
And it's cheap to get another t-shirt. It's cheap to get another skirt, right? Like that's also driving these kind of unsustainable modes of consumption, pricing, and the lack of awareness on the supply chain. In fact, I truly believe if people really understood what is the impact that they can have, then they would make better choices. And we've seen that within our system, right? Like we've actually done tests during that research period, we did tests with universities to show people our data versus like a conventional item. And once they realize that this is the reduction or the change that they can make with a more sustainable item, more than 50% of them chose to get the more sustainable version. So there's a 50% increase in choosing the more sustainable version.
Yes.
And so it makes a huge, huge impact because you always want to make a better choice for yourself. Nobody was out there to pollute the rivers or the air. We want to leave a legacy that's good for us, good for the environment. The thing is, we're not enabled to do so. There's not enough information. The information that's there tends to be confusing. All these weird labels that nobody knows or understands. Just boil it down to the essentials. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it accessible, make it easy to get the data, and make the data trustworthy. And that's probably the toughest part. And that's what we're really addressing right now.
No, I definitely think you're on something there, because I think that, when you make something easy for people, right? Like, for example, I think on our first call that we had, we spoke briefly about this, but, personally, I don't go out of my way to understand how much carbon output, or what footprint my clothes left, right? But if I can see, if I can have two pieces of clothing in front of me, and I can clearly see that, oh, this one had less, it's easier for me then to choose the clothing that had less, of carbon footprint. But it just makes it so much easier, right? And I think if you can implement that at a large scale, because of course, if you can choose, why would you go with the thing that is going to make the planet worse, right? In terms of then actual, for the people who are, and not to digress too much here, but for people who want to understand a little bit more of the consequences, is there anything that, let's say 10 years or 20 years from now, if this is not addressed, if something is not done with this, if, that 1%, you mentioned that it's like taking Argentina off the map, right? If we don't remove that one, if we don't do anything about this, what is going to happen? Are our kids going to feel the consequence of that, or are our grandkids going to feel the consequences of that? Like, how does this look like?
We are feeling the consequences of that. I mean, very simply put, it's not about our kids or grandkids. We're feeling it right now. With a lot of things that are happening in the world. The weather changing right now, almost spring in the Netherlands, and it's just February. All of these changes are affecting our global supply chains, the food that we consume, things, how we live our lives. You're talking about travel and flights and all of that. Flight disruptions due to weather patterns is a huge part of it. There's more crashes that are happening, more hurricanes in the world, so people are actually losing houses. The wildfires, which started every year, I think for the last 5 years or so, we've started with news on wildfires somehow. Right?
Yeah.
That's all caused by climate change.
Yeah.
It's a big factor to that, right? It's a massive impact that's going to happen. It's not far removed. We are experiencing it right now, but what's happening is a little bit of boiling the frog, where the temperature is getting worse and worse. The baseline is getting worse and worse. And we are getting to a point we don't even remember what it used to be like. Like a lot of people can't think back to, hey, 30 years ago, did I hear bird song? Did I have to hide from the rain? And if you think back to your childhood, the nature that you experienced was probably very, very different. One kind of anecdote that I always get is like when you're driving around in the US and typically there was this idea that you had to scrape all the bugs off your windshield. You don't have to do that anymore because there are no bugs. There's been such a mass extinction of bugs that people don't have to scrape them off their windshield as much anymore. Which it's great for your car, but if you look at that, the bugs are like the base of the biosphere. As they disappear, the food chain becomes more and more scarce, and things will start dying out. Things are starting to die out. So the consequences will be experienced right now in terms of us having to live with more uncertainty. paying more for stuff and not really having that great an environment and that great access to things anymore. The great kind of boom that we had where we could have everything at our fingertips is just going to go away.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's important. The reason I ask this question is because, personally, I still need to be convinced to make a more conscious choice when it comes to the environment. And I know a lot of people who need to do the same, but when they hear you talk about this, right, about the consequences that it can have, right, no one wants things to be more expensive. No one wants the environment to go bad, but like being able to visualize, well, how will that future look? I think that's so important for people to understand, like the actual consequences of not making that conscious choice. What is that going to have today, 5 years, 10 years from now? Do you want that life? Right. So I think, when you communicate this, and that's why I'm asking these questions, because I think what you're doing is important. And I think it's important for people to become educated about this, just the same way people became educated with, the vegan stuff. Right. And so the business that you have, your vision is to impact and get 1 billion people to make more conscious choices. How do you achieve that? I mean, how do you get there? How does that look like?
Yeah, so when we started off, we were initially thinking of looking at apps and building our own system of delivery. But one of the things we realized is we don't have to do that. The startup ecosystem is littered with companies who've tried to do that, have tried to reach consumers directly, and you're just burning through millions in cash, and you never get there because the delivery system, you have to invent the delivery system. And you're telling people, hey, take out your phone, check this, and then see if you want to buy it. And let's face it, we're way too lazy to do any of that. I include myself in that. So
yeah.
The point is to work with companies and basically use their delivery mechanism. And that messaging mechanism is on us 24/7, right? Wherever we go, we have ads. If you go to the groceries, we have all these kind of labels and advertisements around it. Every second of every day, we're looking at an ad some way or the other. It might be like a logo on your shirt. That is an ad in and of itself, right? So we just said, okay, let's just use that. Let's make sure that this message piggybacks on information that's already there, right? So, for example, what we do with a lot of our companies is we show our data on their product pages. So if you go and are shopping for something, below the dollar figure, you'll see how much carbon you can save or how much is offset or what's the impact of this item right away. So you then start comparing all these numbers together and making a more holistic decision that makes sense to you. Or if they're in the tags, you can quickly scan a QR code or sometimes print it on the tag directly on what this is. So as you're scanning and looking for pricing and information, you will see this other information come up as well. So it's really providing the right information at the right time, at the right channels. So not inventing your own path. So we have probably already reached 1 billion people, as in somehow linked up with 1 billion people because of brands we work with. So at some way or another, a lot of people have seen the messaging, the metrics, the data. I'm not sure if we have actually caused them to consistently make that change. And that's something that we're trying to measure. I don't see global carbon footprint going up by 1% right now. So I'm guessing not.
But it's just on what you're saying, because now that I think of it, I think there have been times, and I may be wrong here, but if my memory is right, sometimes when I buy things, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I've seen the CO2, like something around that, together with a product. It's come up multiple times. I never really pay attention to it. But could it be that? Or something along those lines? Not necessarily yours, but could it be something along those lines where you have that this green leaf CO2 and then it's some number, or you save up? Could that be it?
It's similar to that. What we've seen is just showing the CO2 number doesn't do the trick. It really depends on where you show it, how you show it, and in what format. So typically CO2 is like a weird thing to think about, right? What is a kilogram of CO2? We can't visualize it.
Right.
It's a colorless, odorless gas. So what does it actually look like? What does 1 kg of a gas weigh? Not weighs a kg, but what does it look like? Right? we started thinking of making it into more approachable terms. So one of the things we do is like, this is equal to you not driving your car for a day or you planting 2 trees. So that makes it more tangible, because if you cannot visualize it, you can't make a choice. If you're, to your point, if you're looking at the dollar value of something, you can see the cash in your account disappearing and it has an impact on you, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't visualize something or make it tangible, you're not going to make a decision on it. It's really tough to get that intellectual decision happening, unless it's something really, really big, right? Like you're buying a house or a car or something, right?
I was going to say, but even, just the example that you give, right? Like planting 2 trees or not driving your car for a day, to me, I don't understand how, I can't visualize it. I can't visualize the impact that not driving my car for a day will have, or planting 2 trees. I know that trees, oxygen, like you have this sort of idea, interpretation of, roughly, but it doesn't stick enough, right? It's not painful. Like even with, take smoking, for example, right? In recent years, actually not even recent, I think this has been for a while, right? But on the packaging, you got all these, people, lungs, this very strong messaging, right? that says, if you smoke this pack, you're going to get cancer. Or if you do this, it's going to lead to your heart or your child is going to look like this, right? And I think with this, how can you make it so that it becomes, the messaging essentially becomes so clear that, like, if I were to see it, if I saw that little logo, CO2 carbon logo there, I'd be like, whoa, wait a minute, right? It would make me stop and reconsider, in a sense. So it's either, like in my head, I'm either thinking that or somehow educate society, in a sense.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, these labels did have an impact on smoking to some way, right? You're not going to change everybody's minds. So some of the examples that I said might not stick with you, but others might. You might try to make it more. And this is the issue with marketing, right? There is no favorite Pepsi, there's favorite Pepsis.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
right.
a different flavor for everyone. So you have to experiment with how you're saying to your audience. And we highly encourage our clients to always do that. What resonates with what segment of your audience, and present that information. For some people, it might be water, it might be cars, it might be trees, it might be something else.
Yeah.
Present the information in the right way so you can help people make the right choices, but also let them choose their own path. Like I always think of a breadcrumbs approach, where you give them just that one piece of pertinent information to hook them. And then if they want to go in deeper, they can actually click, read the reports, read the transparency, see all the information. So it's really about figuring out what works for your audience. Absolutely. There's no, singular answer, because you're talking about changing human behavior.
Yeah.
And that is so complex in so many ways.
Psychology, in a sense, yes. Right? And do you ever, because I imagine a business like this, I mean, companies, when I think about businesses and companies, and I think about capitalism, I think about, people running these companies, and then I start thinking about greed. I start thinking about them trying to preserve their money. Like, is there any risk for businesses to lose out on money? Do you ever get pushback? Is there, are there certain companies out there that are against your mission, what you're trying to do?
It would be hard for companies to completely come out against that mission. It's like saying you're anti-environmentalist, but sure. A lot of companies would rather keep business as is, because they keep the profits and everything as is. But we're changing a change in attitude, especially over the last 5 years, around COVID time, when things really hit. Consumer behavior started to become more conscious, at least for a very big segment. It's split in 2 directions. People who just shop till they drop, and that's what led to Shein and Temu and all this kind of stuff coming in. But then there was the other big sector who were like, should I really be buying all this? Should I be doing all this? And started exploring more. So consumer understanding of sustainability has increased a lot in the last 5 years. But a big part of that has been, there's been a lot of regulations, especially in Europe, that have come out, which have been pushing for more sustainable manufacturing and supply chains. So brands have this opportunity now to basically ensure that they can be compliant with the regulation, but also at the same time meet the customer expectations and kind of go to where the customers are going, right? Wayne Gretzky always said, like, go to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is. So this is kind of what brands are starting to do right now. They're seeing this whole zeitgeist happening in consumer behavior where they are making more conscious choices. They just want to be shown how to do that. And that's what companies are exploring. How do you do that? And for us, the answer is, start out with the data, just really understand both from your supply chain and about your consumers, and then present the data in the right way. And we've seen some fantastic examples of this. We had a brand called Back to Paddles in the US that we work with. They started incorporating this kind of messaging as an organic brand into their website through us. And they saw a 40% jump in their sales conversion on the website. So if you do it right, and they were really thoughtful about it. We worked on it for months, put it out there. If you do it right, it can have an enormous impact. And this is not a startup. They were established for a long time.
So it's actually almost profitable for businesses to kind of do this instead of oppose it secretly, of course.
Absolutely. I think you can oppose progress to some extent. A lot of companies do, but only to a certain extent. Right? After that, it just becomes an exercise in futility. And I think that's what we're trying to say. You can go the way of the buggy whip, or you can try to be more sustainable.
And what are your thoughts about those who are against climate change, right? Like I read on this guy, I think his name is Björn Lomborg. Have you heard of him?
No, not really.
Okay, so he's someone who is, he kind of goes against the climate change consensus today, where he talks about the fact that it's not as bad as people make it out to be, right? The consequences aren't as, and he comes with a lot of strong claims. I think he's been on some other big podcasts before where he talks about this. But what are your views on individuals like him who, and you haven't heard of him, so it's hard to have a strong opinion about it, but just from what I've said.
I've heard a lot from a lot of climate deniers. The one thing that I've seen in common is, by and large, these people completely reject what 99% of their colleagues are saying and want a dissenting opinion. And what they're very good at, and this is what's kind of scary about these folks, they're very good at cherry picking. They look at the tiny stats, put them out of context, and say, hey, this really matters. One of the weirdest ones I had was somebody told me about CO2 concentrations in the time of the dinosaurs. They're like, hey, CO2 used to be a lot higher then, why don't we do that? And like, A, we're not dinosaurs.
Yeah.
B, like, our ecosystems aren't set up for that right now.
Yeah.
If the change was happening as it did during a geological time spans over millions or tens of millions of years, fine, we could adopt to it. But all of this is happening in 20 years, 30 years. That's within not just our lifespan, it's in the lifespan of like small animals. You cannot evolve or adapt in that short a period of time.
Yeah,
that's a fundamental thing. It's a systemic big issue, and it's really hard to get our heads around it because systems change in hundreds, thousands, millions of years. They're not meant to change so rapidly. That's when you start breaking things. And that's what's happening right now.
What would be what is the biggest threat to climate change today?
Human activity. It's everything, right? Like if you look at whatever is happening right now is consumption and things as they are right now. It's really making a huge impact on the world. Like business as is. It's basically consumerism coupled with climate denialism and whatever is going on right now, which to me, I'm old enough to remember where in the 90s, everybody was okay with it. Conservatives, liberals, whatever it is, they all said, okay, climate change is happening. It's caused by humans. We're all good. We'll do something about it. Then, fast forward 10 years when 2000 started, there was this little kind of scratch from some studies funded by vested interests and oil companies. Hey, are we really sure? Can you kind of look into that a little bit? I know everybody agreed. I know we're out there. Can you think about it? And then it slowly grew and grew because it's easy to amplify the crazies and it's easy to amplify dissent because that's how systems are built right now, social media and all of this. And suddenly you have one person who has no data and no understanding, but who can be very, very loud and very, very persuasive, suddenly come in and say these things and be put on the same panel, like at a talk show or something, as a PhD and as somebody who spent 50 years studying this and dedicated his life to it, versus somebody who spent like 2 years of research online to challenge them around this, right? So that's what's Audible. It's like everybody gets a platform, that's great, but everybody does get an equal platform, and maybe that's not really needed. You don't need to hear the other side when it's fact versus fiction.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point that you're mentioning there. I think that, there is a lot of this going on with social media today, right? Where everyone really through social media has a platform. In a sense, we have a platform right now, right? Where this content will be published online to technically hundreds of millions of people, although it won't get hundreds and millions of views, it's still accessible to all those people, right? And still, we could be talking about the most unhinged things about climate change right now. And let's say for those who watch this, 10-20% choose to believe what we're talking about, it creates an effect, creates a ripple effect, right? So, if you take those platforms that you're mentioning right now, where you do have a huge, much larger audience, there's going to be people there who are going to believe the person who goes against the person who has researched this for 50 plus years, and then, yeah, sure, you get that effect. But when it comes to the future of your business, I mean, you're working with companies right now. And you mentioned that obviously through companies can make it, you can have a bigger impact. How do you acquire customers today? What does your business actually look like? Let's break the business down a little bit.
Yeah, so we basically work with companies up and down the supply chain. So we get a lot of businesses from referrals, because we work with, say, a brand, and they work with a bunch of suppliers. They say, hey, work with these suppliers. We work with them, and then we work with their suppliers, and we reach out to them as well. We also produce a lot of content in this space. We were when we first started off, we were the first company in the world doing this at scale with the technology platform. So that first mover advantage has kind of carried on. We have a lot of content we've put out and have set ourselves as experts in this space. So we get a lot of inquiries. And we also get a lot of referrals from government organizations, from industry bodies who are looking for something like this. Because we genuinely want to help. We work with large companies, multi-billion-dollar corporations, but also small startups who are making this difference. And we have different offerings for them. And they've seen our success because we work with a lot of pioneering brands across the world. And that, again, gives us this referral knowledge business. There's very little that we do in terms of outreach. A lot of it really comes from what we build and inbound and the referrals that we get through the associations that we work with.
So a lot of it is inbound. And then you work with those companies, you get word of mouth, you get referrals. How do you... So the scaling, the growing of this business, is the idea to always do inbound? Or are you planning on doing outbound? Are you...
I mean, it's basically, as every company grows, you need to start mixing a bit of inbound and outbound. We're starting to do this, but we've been also, just through the right partnerships, by working with the right companies, we've been getting a lot of traction. It goes back to how I said on delivering the message to consumers. Why build your own channels and mediums when there is already pre-built systems? So we look at the right partners and see, okay, which of these partners already work with the companies we want to work? Which of their offerings are synergistic to ours? And how can we provide something that is better combined, better together?
Yeah.
And we approach them, provide that, and that's been quite successful play for us.
That's actually a good strategy right there. I think this is, I read a book on this sometime, but it was high leverage. You're really leveraging there, right? The work that you're doing there, because you're, instead of building, the reinventing the wheel, you're already just, you're riding along with it. And it's fascinating though, because I think that, entrepreneurship, what led you to do this was, a lot of it comes back to the early experiences that you have, right? And I think that, This podcast started off, it's called What It Takes. It's all about what does it take to succeed as an entrepreneur? What does it take? And it really, the thing that I've understood about entrepreneurs is that a lot of them, even yourself, driven by this need or desire, which has been shaped a lot of the times through early experiences. And for you, in your case, you mentioned that it was the fact that you were exposed to nature, the fact that you were exposed to a lot of this at an early age. But taking that leap, however, right, that is another thing. So a lot of people out there have dreams. A lot of people out there want to become entrepreneurs and pursue their dreams, right? But instead, they're working corporate jobs. What made you not pursue a career in mergers and acquisitions or just have a stable income as opposed to pursuing entrepreneurship? What made you take that leap?
Good question. I think it really comes down to where your passions lie and what is the impact that you want to make. To me, it wasn't about entrepreneurship or ownership of this problem or solution. It was really about the impact that I wanted to make in the world. And I looked around and I didn't find any other company that was doing this. And I'm like, this is a big problem. This is something we should solve. Somebody's got to do something about it. And that really drove me to really explore this and try and find somebody first. And then I couldn't find anybody. I was that somebody. But that was it. It's really, I don't think you always have to be an entrepreneur. Like a lot of it is glorified a lot, unfairly so. I think people think you're just like the models and bottles kind of lifestyle. It's a lot of grinding, hard work. You're not your own boss. Everybody's your boss. You're kind of running around looking for money all the time. If you're a startup, you're just always selling, and you're on 24/7 most of the time. It's tough. Like the number of founders that I've met who have completely burnt out is just way too many, like dozens who kind of gone through this grind and burnt out. So it's not for everyone. I just think if you're finding something that you're really passionate about, and if there is a way you can do that while maintaining all the other things that will make your life okay, whether it's stable income or something, then great. If it is something that you really want to do, that you feel that you have the bandwidth to do, the mental space to do, financial security to do, and test out for a while, then go for it, right? It's a great experience. It's tough, but it really grows you as a person. But I don't think that you need to do it just because you have a dream to do it, unless you really thought through it and you can make that jump.
Yeah, because it's what you're saying, right? Entrepreneurship glorified, bottles and models. A lot of the things that are happening around entrepreneurship, especially the youngsters. I'm 26 right now, and I've seen a lot of young individuals pursue entrepreneurship because they see people on Instagram or YouTube drive around in Lamborghinis and Ferraris and party with models and have this sort of a life. A lot of them pursue entrepreneurship because they want this. They want to retire their family. They want to create generational wealth. They want, a lot of these things. Do you think those are good motivations to be an entrepreneur, to build something yourself?
I think motivation is what gets you there in the first part, the passion. What keeps you going is discipline. Right. And is the motivation sufficient to get to a point where you have enough discipline? Is a question you should ask yourself. Because the passion might get you there. Whatever your motivation, it can be anything. And pure greed can be for making an impact. Anything is a motivation to be an entrepreneur. There's nothing stopping you, right? But beyond that, do you think it's sufficient for you to then grind it out when the rubber really hits the road, right? And that's important to consider. Because I always think like I'm very passionate about this, but that's not what keeps me going. What keeps me going is I have a lot of discipline in how I do things. I kind of make sure things are getting done on time. I'm on top of stuff. I was watching the video by Y Combinator and it really stuck with me. One of the things they said is like, as an entrepreneur, you have to kind of adult harder than your peers.
And that's just life.
Adult harder,
Yeah.
Pay the bills on time, make sure you're home when your friends are out partying, make sure you're looking at your research and sales figures and all of that when people are out drinking on a Friday night. That's kind of what it takes if you want to be like an entrepreneur, if you want to, grow your companies to millions, if not billions. That's what it takes. The guys who are doing all of the other stuff, who are out there partying, they have a steady job, and that's different. They don't have those same aspirations. So will you have the drive to do that if this given your motivation? That's something you got to ask yourself.
Right. Speaking of discipline, then, how does one get better at discipline? Is it something that they're born with? Is it something that they're taught from a young age? Is it something that you can learn?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think like it can be all of the above. There are some who've had that specific upbringing where they've been taught and instilled discipline from a very young age. A lot of people like me, I learned through experiential now. So just seeing what works for me, seeing how to maintain habits and build it up and work through that. But as I said, a lot of it does come from motivation. If you really want to do something, you will understand that it takes discipline to do that. And you're just going to focus. It's like if you want to lose like 20 pounds, right? You have to hit the gym at least twice a week or whatever it is. So if that's really a goal, you're going to maintain the discipline to, go to the gym every other day and kind of put in the work. Same thing over here, right? If you really are going to be an entrepreneur, you really want to build up your company, you'll soon figure out what it takes on a day-to-day basis. Now, can you keep that up? It's a question, and that's the discipline.
How would you define discipline?
That's a tough question. I think discipline to me is the ability to keep on a task or keep on a set of actions, even when you don't feel like it. When you just can push through based on nothing but like instilled habits that are there within you.
So it's like you say you're going to do something and, you keep up with it for a while. The moment comes after a week to, who knows, month, you're like, I don't want to do this. I want to just relax on the couch, order some junk food and watch Netflix instead of working right now. Discipline is keep going.
It's like, no, this is not it. Like if I'm going to achieve my goals, I need to stop thinking that way. I need to continue to do what I'm doing.
Can one ever take a break? Is discipline always doing what you say you do? Or how does a person, for example, because, I've spoken to a bunch of entrepreneurs, young individuals who want to become entrepreneurs, and it's a huge topic for young individuals, especially. It's that discipline, right? When I first started out, I also had my fair struggles with discipline. And I learned that systems is the best way for me to stick to stuff. So I keep things very simple. I say, how can I design a life that that gives me energy, that makes it easier for me to do the things that I have to do, right? And a lot of the times when I talk to people about discipline, it comes to this point where discipline is essentially, it's hard for people to stick to it. I think when it comes to trying to be a better version of ourselves, we often think about these breaks that we want to have throughout the path. Do you have to plan a break? Let me break this down in a different way, Akhil. So I read this book, Atomic Habits, and they say that whenever you do something, whenever you do, you pursue an action, you are essentially casting a vote for the type of person that you want to be. If you don't do what you say you do you believe that goes against being disciplined?
All the time. And I think this is the difference between being rigid and being flexible, right? Like you can kind of get to so much rigidity and so much discipline that you break. Life isn't that simple. You can't just be an automaton and always deliver, always go through it. Sometimes it just might be too much. I mean, there's a lot of unexpected things that happen in life, in entrepreneurship or otherwise. So that doesn't mean necessarily that if you don't do that you've failed or you're not going to get there. It's like you kind of have to set your limits. Like I'm not going to be working 24/7. I'm not going to be disciplined 24/7. It's really trying to understand what your capacity is now and where you want it to be and building towards that. Like for me, for example, typically at the beginning of a day, I have the 3 things I really have to accomplish no matter what. It's set in stone. I make sure that's done. The rest of the stuff, I have a laundry list of other things. It may or may not happen depending on priority and other things that happen, right? But that's my discipline. That's as far as I can stretch it, right? Some people are a lot more rigid in that they're like, everything has to happen right away, right now. And I found that personally a little bit destructive for you mentally to do that. Some people can do that and they can accomplish extraordinary things, but I've seen this is kind of what my limit is, and this is what works for me, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of really understanding what works for you and then following through with that, like in terms of it. It's a really hard question to answer because it's so personal, right? Like it changes person to person. And for some people, discipline might just be taking a walk every day. That's all they got to do. And that's all they want to do. And that's fine because you've defined your limits and you want to just do that because you have certain goals in terms of health or whatever it is. So enough. Right.
I wouldn't have put it any other way. And I think that's the advice that I would definitely tell my younger self, because, you know, the reason why I said I struggled with discipline was when I first started off with entrepreneurship, I said I was going to do, 2-hour exercise every day. I was going to meditate for 30 minutes. I was going to take a cold shower. I was going to do this and that. I was going to work 12 hours every day. I was going to read a book and reflect right. And I was at a certain limit, and then I just tripled it or doubled it. And I always failed. I was never able to stick. What I said to myself is, I'm going to set a limit. What do I realistically think I can do for a year? A full year, every single day. And I started so small. I said, I am just going to stick to this, this, and this. And then I gradually increased it. I can do this. This was quite easy. I'm going to increase it. I'm going to increase it little by little by little by little. And I think this is such a great advice for any entrepreneur. I want to wrap up, Akhil, with one final question for you today. What does it take to succeed?
We talked a lot about that one topic. I think is discipline. I personally, I believe in that a lot, but a big thing for me is perseverance. I think the advice that sticks with me now, and I received it back, still remember, in 2016 from a mentor of mine, is the longer you stay in the game, the luckier you get. And, success in entrepreneurship is tricky, right? There's a lot of amazing ideas, well-funded, great people who never make it out the door because tides change. Like, if you're caught up in the SVB issue a couple of years ago, you might have had a great idea and you just collapse. So luck does play a factor in all of this. Basically things beyond your control. But if you are resilient and you can get back up again, take the knocks and just persevere, I feel that has a huge impact on your success rate.
Yeah, that's amazing. We did definitely touch on a lot of stuff when it comes to it, but I think, perseverance, discipline, and also with what you're saying, right? The longer you stay in the game, it's like you're, I don't remember who said this, maybe it was Naval, but it's success, there was a luck factor to it. And how do you increase the opportunity for luck? I think it was something along those lines, right? So you
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I mean, it's literally that, right? Like you kind of sometimes have to increase your surface area, shake the tree, whatever they call it, right?
Yeah. Amazing. Akhil, I had a real pleasure talking to you today, man. And just learning more about climate, your vision, your purpose, what it is that you do in your business, which is really fascinating to learn more about. If people want to connect with you, man, where can they find you?
So they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and then Greenstory at greenstory.io. Feel free to reach out. You have a form. I'm always accessible on LinkedIn. I always find that's the best way to connect with me. Just reach out, drop a message, drop a connection, and say, I want to talk about sustainability. Then you're definitely accepting it.
Amazing, man. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much. It was, again, a real pleasure. And dude, take care, man.